Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 31st of July of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. We can say that the war, or the special military operation, has been changed since the beginning of the February of 2022. We're talking not about the tactics, about the soldiers, about the military forces. We're talking about everything. We're talking about technologies, and we're talking about new weapon. We're talking about new doctrines that either the Russians and the Ukrainians start using during the special military operation. So let's talk about everything step by step. And first we're going to start, of course, with the south, with Crimea. Today the Western sources published the video how they managed to destroy and to attack the bridge in this area. If you remember, this is Changarsky railway bridge that was attacked a few days ago by 5 Storm Shadow missiles. The Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that they managed to shut down every single missile, but now we got the first video photo confirmation of that area that probably some of the missiles managed to get the target, or at least the parts that the Russians shut down the missiles, and the parts of those rockets fell down on this area and they detonated, and now we see the result of that explosion. Now we're moving to Kherson direction. In this area we also got a lot of very interesting updates, and first we have the video of the Russians how they were bombing and shelling the Ukrainian positions in that area using the guided bombs, using probably the Su-34 aircrafts modernized with that can attack the Ukrainian positions with the guided bombs. And I would like to add that these Su-34 aircrafts appeared just during the special military operation. There was like the models of that aircraft before, but just during the special military operation the Russians took a decision to modernize these aircrafts, that currently these aircrafts are able to use and to carry guided bombs. And this development, this military technology, the Russians started using just during this operation. Furthermore, we got another very interesting video from the Ukrainian side of the Dnipro River. The Russians also probably developed a very interesting type of weapon. This is the baggy, as you know, and they managed to put the anti-tank weapon on that small light vehicle, and from this position, as you can see, the Russians can attack the Ukrainian forces. I'm not saying that this is a very difficult military development, this military science achievement or something like this, but this is also very important. As you can see, the Russians managed to adapt to the current situation, because when the Russians were using the personal carriers, armored vehicles, the Ukrainians, when they see such type of weapons, start bombing this area immediately. And during the previous weeks, the Russians lost lots of armored vehicles in this area trying to evacuate the Russian soldiers from this area. And after that, as you can see, the Russians adapted to this tactic and started using light vehicles that are very fast. They're very fast and they're faster than armored vehicles. They're pretty invisible for the Ukrainians, and the most important, sometimes if you're a Ukrainian soldier, you don't want to spend and waste your time on this type of weapon, because sometimes it is much more expensive to use the weapon against this armored vehicle, against this vehicle, in comparison than not to do anything. The Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of fierce fighting in the vicinity of Antonov Bridge in Kherson area, the Ukrainians lost 30 soldiers, 3 armored vehicles and 2 artillery systems, one M777 howitzer and another ANT-PQ-36. And before moving further, I'll remind you one more time that when talking about this bridgehead, the Russians started using massively Su-34 modernized that can use guided bombs, and this very funny but probably very powerful and very useful buggy vehicle with mounted anti-tank weapon. Now we're moving further and we're going to talk a little bit about Kazatska. In this area, the Russians also were using the Su-34 aircrafts with the guided bombs, and as you can see, the result of usage of this type of weapon is very powerful. The Russians are ruining this settlement, reducing this settlement till ruins. And according to the Russian sources, the Ukrainians are planning to use this settlement, this bridgehead, for possible upcoming, let's say, crossing the river operation, marine operation, when the Ukrainians will try to establish their bridgehead on the Russian bank of Dnipro River. Now we're moving further and we're going to talk about Zaporozhye area. We got a lot of very interesting updates from this bridgehead, and the first updates are coming from Petykhatki. As we discussed in the previous videos, we received during the previous week a lot of updates from this bridgehead. Mainly, most of them are about the Ukrainian positions, that the Russians were bombing and attacking the Ukrainian positions among these forest lines and so on, which confirms the stable and 100% control of Petykhatki and the forest lines and the fields around the settlement under Ukrainian control. On this video, for example, we see how the Russians discovered the Ukrainian ammo depot, and as a result of artillery strike, with accurate artillery strike, the Russians destroyed that ammo depot. And on the other flank, the Russians published the video how they discovered the Ukrainian positions, the Ukrainian forces who was moving along the forest lines, probably reconnaissance team. The Russians discovered that reconnaissance team, and after that, after missile attacks, probably that reconnaissance team was destroyed, or even artillery. And the thing is that, as you can see, the Russians during the previous days, during this year, started using the night vision weapon equipment massively. I'm not saying that the Russians didn't have this technology in the past. They had this, but this is a very important technology. And just during the special military operation, the Russians managed to increase the production of this type of equipment. And currently, almost every single front line has a squad or platoon or some engineering team who has this type of weapon. And this is a very important type of weapon because the main attacks, the main movements the Ukrainians try to do during the night period of time. And if this or that front line has this type of weapon, of course it increases the effectiveness of this or that unit from the Russian side. Now we're moving to Zaporozhye area. Today, as you can see, we also got a lot of updates, a lot of events took place during the day, and probably one of the most interesting is this one, when the Russians continue usage of their night vision weapon equipment. On this video, we see how the Ukrainians were trying to make evacuation. At least the author of this video told us that the Ukrainians were planning to make evacuation or even rotation, because if you remember, during the first wave of attack that took place a few days ago, when the Ukrainians managed to capture all these trenches in the forest line but lost a significant number of armored vehicles, it's already 4 days left since the beginning of that operation. Of course, it's time to start rotation. It's time to collect those who survived among these fields and to send them back to Orekhov and to replace them with the fresh forces before the next wave of attack, because it is very difficult to start the new wave of attack if you don't have fresh forces on the ground. Another video with the night vision also was published from the same area, but a little bit to the north. Maybe those two videos was the same video, but was split in two parts. And this episode, you can see that Ukrainians also was trying to make evacuation, but the Russians managed to discover their position during the passage of this forest line, and as a result of strike, probably of artillery or using the TOW weapon, anti-tank missiles, they destroyed the armored vehicles that were passing by this area. So currently we see the rotation process in this area. Also, we got more videos from this bridgehead. The Russians were destroying the armored Ukrainian vehicles that were left and dropped among the fields. Some of them were destroyed in the mines. Some videos that were published today, it took place a few days ago, not just today. But also we got a very interesting video how the Ukrainians managed to complete rotation process somewhere in the vicinity of Zaporozhye. This video is not geolocated accurately, probably softly. We see how the Ukrainians completed evacuation. The forces probably who stands on the ground for last 3 days finally got their evacuation machine. The Russians managed to discover that evacuation machine, and then that evacuation machine was attacked by Lancer drone. Another technology, massive technology that the Russians started using just during the special military operation. Almost every single front line has the Lancet squad. And basically this is the game changer weapon. Not just this, but every single weapon we just discussed, including guided bombs, Su-34, night vision equipment, Lancet drones. All these types of weapon is game changers. And furthermore, all of these types of weapon were modernized during the special military operation. If we compare Lancet and Su-34 and night vision equipment currently during this situation and with this type of weapon before the special military operation, that was completely two different types of weapon. Completely, and currently the Russians have much more power and they have much better weapon. Now we are moving further to the Vremivka tactical bridgehead. We also got a lot of updates from this area. The Ukrainians published the videos how they were attacking the Russians with drones among the forest lines and so on. We're using this video not to, of course, first of all, to show the Ukrainians tactics. As you can see, this is the only effective weapon the Ukrainians have, the drones. Almost every single day we got at least about dozens and dozens videos from the Ukrainian side how the Ukrainians managed to track and destroy Russian vehicles. For example, in this video we see how another drone, just a regular FVP drone, discovered Russian positions, and after that the Ukrainians attacked the Russian forces somewhere in the vicinity of Vorozhaina. We use this video just for geolocation of the combat line and geolocation of Ukrainian and Russian positions. Another video took place a little bit to the east from the previous one. Also, the Ukrainians using drones discovered Russian positions, and after that, after a small reconnaissance operation, the Ukrainians attacked the Russians in the trenches or in the small stronghold. This is the episode of attack. So basically this video we also use to show and clarify the combat line and the real Russian and the Ukrainian positions. We saw the videos from the north of Staromayorsk. The Russians left that settlement. Some sources are saying that the Russians were forced even to leave the settlement further to the south. Some sources, Russian sources, started reporting today after 4 p.m. that the Russians launched a counter-offensive operation and managed to force the Ukrainians to step back, but yet we haven't received even a single confirmation from the Russian side about that progress. We have just the videos how the Ukrainians entered, how the Ukrainians were attacking, and how the Russians were bombing the Ukrainian positions. Furthermore, we got another video on the western flank of Staromayorsk. On this video we see how the Ukrainians were attacking, bombing the Russian positions, and basically we're also using this video to clarifying the combat line and the on the western flank of Staromayorsk. Furthermore, when talking about this area, about South Donetsk and Vremivka, this area is famous not for Su-34 or night vision weapon or something like this. The most probably powerful and the most probably useful type of weapon that the Russians were using is of course Ka-52 helicopters. And during the special military operation, the Russians implemented at least few improvements of that system, of those helicopters, and the most important upgrade is that the Russians currently using new type of rockets on board of that helicopters. The previous version of the rockets that the Russians were using on these helicopters were able to fly around 8 kilometers. Those were the guided missiles, guided rockets, but the distance that the Russians were able to use just 8 kilometers. And this summer, probably this spring, the Russians have upgraded the missiles, and currently the Russians use the modern, the most freshest version of these missiles, and the Russians can attack the enemy in the distance of 15 kilometers. Just imagine yourself, the Russians have zoom equipment to see the enemy on the ground, like this one. For example, on this video we see how the Russians were attacking armored vehicles in the distance of 15 kilometers. They discovered an attack, and the Ukrainians don't have possibilities to shut down those helicopters. They just don't have this type of weapon. And I'll remind you that this weapon was upgraded and improved during the special military operation. And the question is, what did the Ukrainians, what have the Ukrainians improved during the special military operation? What have Western countries improved during the special military operation? I believe they have improved something, but we yet haven't seen these improvements on the ground. And currently this is the most important part. Now we are moving to South Donetsk area, and today we got very interesting and strange updates from Prichistovka. The Russian sources published a video of redeployment of a very big convoy in the vicinity of this settlement. The sources haven't reported the purpose and the reason of this redeployment, but as I understand, and as we discussed in the previous videos, the Ukrainians have redeployed the forces of 38th Marine Brigades with the wolves on the shields. This is their icon. They have redeployed in the vicinity of Prichistovka and Ugledar. This brigade is from strategical reserve that used to be located according to deployment map in the vicinity of Odessa, and as I understand, this redeployment of armored vehicles is completely connected with the redeployment of this brigade. So basically they're bringing their vehicles from one part of Ukraine to another. It's the vehicles that belongs and forces and to this 38th Marine Brigade. Now we're moving to Mariinka, to Donetsk area. But before that, just another few more things about South Donetsk, of course. The Minister of Defense reported that as a result of fierce fightings in this area, the Ukrainians lost 275 soldiers, 17 armored vehicles, including 3 tanks and 5 artillery systems. And mainly the Ukrainians were losing the Western artillery systems like M777 Howitzer, FH-70 and M109 Paladin. And another thing, today the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation Shoigu gave his own report about the situation of July. By the end of every single month, he provided a short report about the situation on the ground for the previous months. And today he reported that during the July, the Ukrainians lost 20,824 soldiers during the battles for Ukraine, let's call it like this. 20,000 soldiers, around 2,227 armored vehicles, not just vehicles, different types of weapons, including tanks, and 10 Leopards were destroyed, 11 Bradleys were destroyed, 40 United States Howitzers M777, and many other weapons were destroyed, including Western weapon. And just during the 26th and 27th of July, when the Ukrainians were trying to attack in direction of Robotyne, according to the Ministry of Defense, the Ukrainians lost 400 soldiers and around 31 tanks. So the level of losses is significant. If you remember the previous report of the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation for June, the Ukrainians lost almost the same number of forces. So correct me if I'm wrong, maybe it's plus minus, I don't remember. This idea came to my mind during making this video, but if I remember, during June the Ukrainians lost almost the same number of force, around 20,000 soldiers. So according to the Ministry of Defense, just since the beginning of Ukraine's greatest counter-offensive operation, from the beginning of June, the Ukrainians have already lost 40,000 soldiers during those battles. It's around almost the same number of forces that Wagner's lost during 6-7 months of storming Artyomovsk, Bakhmut. But Wagner's got a result, and they lost the same number of forces during 6-7 months, and the Ukrainians lost less than for 2 months 40,000 soldiers. It's very difficult to understand what is going to be next. Furthermore, the Russians reported that they finished production of modernizing and production of another series of MiG-38. So we just discussed about Su-34, and now we're going to talk about MiG-31, sorry, my bad. And this is the destroyer. This is the destroyer, and probably the Russians do have problems with Storm Shadows and with the Ukrainian Su-24. Those Su-24 that can carry these Storm Shadows, and those Su-24 that probably destroyed the bridge that connected Crimea with the mainland. The Russians probably found a solution. They brought new aircrafts on the ground, on the field, and currently they need to test this type of weapon, because as I understand, as soon as F-16s will be redeployed and deployed on the territory of Ukraine, they will face this MiG-31 in the airfield. And this is going to be exactly a battle between these two type of forces. And if the Russians lose this battle, of course, they will have at least material and data to improve the next generation aircrafts, and they will bring them. But for now, we have what we have. And as I understand and I expect, the usage of the usage of Su-24 on the in the sky of Ukraine because of appearing of this type of aircrafts. And now we are going to moving to Donetsk front line. We got a lot of updates from the Marinka. The Russians bombed the Ukrainian positions on the south, in the vicinity of Novomikhailivka, on the trenches of the north of the settlement. The Russians destroyed the Ukrainian Su-25 that was supporting the Ukrainians in the mission in the defensive operation of Krasnogorovka and Marinka. The Russians destroyed another Ukrainian howitzer in the vicinity of Krasnogorovka. We discussed this episode in the morning video. The Ukrainian reporter published the video of position of Ukrainian artillery systems, and that's why the Russians managed to destroy it. And we got another video of drone attack, also somewhere in the vicinity of Krasnogorovka. This video is not geolocated correctly, maybe like plus minus few meters or even kilometers, but anyway, in this video we see how the Russians managed to discover the Ukrainians, and after that the Russians start bombing and attacking those soldiers using the FVP drones. Also another type of weapon that the Russians started using massively, and we are not talking about Shahed and so on. We're just talking about the things that we got updates of today. When talking about Avdiivka, we haven't received any updates, just the thing that the Russians also on this front line managed to discover the Ukrainian positions in this area, and after that it was like the accumulation of Ukrainian manpower, and as a result of artillery strike the Russians managed to destroy the Ukrainian forces, the accumulation of their light vehicles, armored vehicles. There were a lot of explosions, a lot of smoke, and a lot of fire as well. The Minister of Defense of Russian Federation that as a result of fierce fightings on Donetsk front line, the Ukrainians lost 220 soldiers, 8 armored vehicles and 6 artillery systems. Now we are moving to Klishchiivka. When talking about the 31st of July, at least by the time I start making this video, I haven't received even a single located video from the Ukrainian side from this bridgehead. We just got 2 videos from the Russians. On this video we see how they're using the electronic warfare weapon, not electronic warfare, but counter-artillery radars, of course, counter-artillery radars, and Krasnopol rounds the Russians managed to discover and to destroy the Ukrainian crab artillery system of Polish production. On the northern area, the Russians managed to discover the Ukrainian positions, the Ukrainian forces that were moving along the inside of Ivanovska, and after reconnaissance operation with the drones, the Russians started bombing and shelling that settlement, that area with probably just regular rounds, but there was ammo depot, and after, as you can see, as a result of attack, we see some detonation inside of that building. Now we're moving to the north and to the Sivers bridgehead, and after a few days of a small pause, the 10th Mountain Assault Brigade of Ukrainian forces continue publishing their videos of hunting the Russian soldiers in the fields in the vicinity of Berestove. Probably this is one of the most successful group of forces of Ukrainian army, 10th Mountain Assault Brigade, and when talking about the front lines, as I see, according to the videos, probably this is the only part of the front line, the only group that shows success, normal success, without having significant losses. Because, for example, when talking about Klishchiivka, the Ukrainians, let's say, also shown us some success, but the price they pay for that success is countless. And when talking about this brigade, they're showing some success without like significant losses in comparison with the other brigades. The Russians from their side published another video how they managed to discover and to destroy another Krab system, artillery system of Polish production in the vicinity of Vyimka using Lancet drone. Another super weapon, Russian super weapon. And now we are moving to Liman front line. The Minister of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of fierce fightings in this area, the Ukrainians lost 140 soldiers, 5 armored vehicles and 3 artillery systems. And also a lot of very interesting updates took place in this area. Like we have geolocated videos of bombings and shellings inside of Kremenная forest. Just we are using this video to confirm the geolocation position of Russian positions in this area. So the Ukrainians were using like the intelligence reconnaissance drone, and then they start bombing and shelling the Russian positions in that area. But probably the most important, the most interesting piece of news that we received from this area is, of course, the capturing of the NATO like armored vehicle CV-90, this type of weapon. And probably, according to some source, this is one of the most powerful, the most modern type of vehicles, armored vehicles in the NATO army. And this armored vehicle was captured by the Russians. And this is the photo of this armored vehicle on somewhere on the road of Russian Federation. And as you can see, this armored vehicle was transferring in direction of Russian military science centers. And believe me, the Russians will spare this armored vehicle to parts, and they will investigate every single centimeter of this weapon. And believe me, the Russians will improve their own armored vehicles in the future if they think that they need to do this, because it doesn't mean that this armored vehicle is better than the Russians one. But if this armored vehicle is better, in 6 months the Russians will be the same quality, will have the same quality as this one. And we got also another video how the Russians were redeploying the French tank AMX-10 RC. Also another armored vehicle that the Russians will spare to parts and will improve their own features, will take the best features of this armored vehicle and will improve their own weapon. So another 6 months we're going to see another type of weapon on the battlefield with Ukraine. So as you can see, the Russians are improving their army almost every single day, and the main problem of NATO countries, and the main problem that the Russians had during the previous years of, if not months but years of entire world situation, is that the Western countries had access to the Russian weapon, to the Soviet weapon, because a lot of Soviet weapons left in Poland, in Czech Republic, in Ukraine itself, and the Western countries had possibilities, and the Russians were forced to spend a lot of time, a lot of energy to improve their Soviet weapon to up to the next level. And as soon as the Russians were able to up every single type of weapon to the next level, they started the special military operation, and they spent for this process around 30 years after the collapse of Soviet Union. And now the Russians spent just a year, a little bit more than a year, to level up their weapon for another level. And yet we haven't seen the same progress from the Western countries. And this is a very big problem. And the most important, that during the special military operation, the Russians got access to a lot of Western weapons. And not just to the technologies, but also to understanding whether the Russian weapon is good against the Western air defense systems, against the weapon tanks, against the Western rounds, and so on. And the Russians continue improving their weapon currently. When talking about the Ukrainians on this area, they published the video how they managed to discover the Russian tank that probably stuck somewhere on the road because of bad weather or something like this, and the Ukrainians discovered the position of the tank and basically attacked the tank with the drone. And we haven't received the information about the results of that attack. And now we are getting to Karmazinovka bridgehead. From this area we also got a lot of updates. And the Russians, for example, on this video, we can see how the Russians are using the TOS flamethrower system. They have redeployed this flamethrower system to the combat line, and after that they start bombing and shelling the Ukrainian positions in the forest. And during the special military operation, we've received at least 2 upgrades of this flamethrower system. The first one was the Russians increased the range, the distance of missiles. And at the beginning of the special military operation, the Russians were able to use just 3-6 kilometers missiles for this type of weapon. And now they have increased the range up to 10-12 kilometers, correct me if I'm wrong. So they have increased twice in comparison with the previous situation with this type of weapon. And currently the Russians have reported that they completed another upgrade of this system. And now the Russians are planning to use not just the long-range TOS flamethrower systems, but also with guided missiles. Because before this, the Russians used to use just the regular unguided missiles that you launch and are attacking the square meters without targeting. But you know that this is a very powerful type of weapon, that the chances that everything will be destroyed is very big on the square that this flamethrower system attacks. And now the Russians are planning to use guided missiles. Imagine yourself guided flamethrowers missiles. This is going to be not just a game changer, this is going to be a game ender, I believe so, because if you are able to use this power, this guided power, what can stop it? What can stop any Russian offensive operation? The only thing you need is to get this type of weapon on the combat line, to secure it, to protect it, and to give this type of weapon to attack the entire magazine. and then everything in front of the system will be completely burnt and destroyed. The Ukrainians from their side published the video how they were trying to attack and to get the Russian positions in Tverdohlebovo, the settlement on the west of Novoyegorovka, which probably confirms that the Russians haven't managed to bypass this Novoyegorovka, and currently there are still very fierce clashes between these settlements, Tverdohlebovo and Novoyegorovka. And furthermore, we got a lot of updates from Karmazinovka bridgehead, and the Russians were bombing this area heavily. So probably I assume that the Ukrainians still have control over this part of the bridgehead. So this forest and this small salient, let's say, remains under Ukrainian control. And the Russians have developed their bridgehead to the south of this yellow cloud and to the north. And now we are moving to the Kupiansk front line. The Russians reported they continue advancing in the vicinity of Kislovka, Kotlarovka, Kuzyumovka, Novoselovska. We got another video how the Russians were bombing the Ukrainians' positions in Berestova. And as a result of those attacks, the Russians, using the FAB guided bombs, FAB 250, destroyed another ammo depot somewhere in the forest line. The Ministry of Defense reported that as a result of fierce fightings on the Kupiansk front line, the Ukrainians lost 45 soldiers and 4 armored vehicles. And now probably we're getting to my favorite part of today, and I will show you another video, and I was surprised mostly. This video surprised me most of all during the day, and this is I'm going to talk about. The Russians today published a video how they managed to discover and to destroy the Ukrainian positions or artillery positions in the vicinity of Volshany. This video is geolocated, and one more time, the author of this video reported that artillery forces of Russian Federation discovered and destroyed some Russian-Ukrainian position. So what is so important and interesting in this video? The most interesting part of this video is the distance from these positions to the closest possible Russian positions. If we try to calculate the distance between this area of explosion and, let's say, to the closest nearest Russian position in Bezimena, this small settlement, then we're gonna see that the distance is around 36 kilometers. The Russians needed just one shell to destroy that Ukrainian position, so that means that that shell was guided. And when talking about Krasnopol, the maximum distance of usage of this type of weapon is probably 22-25 kilometers. But on this video we see that the Russians managed to bypass 36 kilometers and to destroy Ukrainian positions. Furthermore, I'm taking, let's say, probably the minimum distance, but I'm not sure that the Russians send their artillery system right to the combat line where we can find a lot of Ukrainian forces. As I understand, the distance was bigger. The distance was probably somewhere from Antonovka. And when talking about this one, we see 50 kilometers. So the Russians have developed some artillery rounds, as I understand, that can attack on distance from 30 to 50 kilometers. These rounds are guided or accurate, and this is another game changer. Yet we haven't seen the massive usage of this type of artillery systems, but just imagine yourself, the Russians from the territory of Russian Federation are able to bomb and to attack the Ukrainian forces in Kharkiv, not with missiles, not with rockets, not with drones, just with regular artillery rounds. This is a significant video and a significant result that Russian military science managed to achieve during the special military operation. And as I understand, the Russians achieved this success probably because of lots of weapons that was captured by the Russians in the past, like M777 howitzer and different types of weapons that Western countries sent to Russia. The Russians have a lot of things to develop, a lot of material to investigate, and they will do this. And believe me, in the next 6 months, we're going to see completely different army with the current situation. And I'm not going even to compare the 6 months after Russian army with the Russian army in the February of 2022. And the question is what the Ukrainians are going to provide. What kind of weapon have they updated or achieved or created? We just have few videos of drones and probably of Navy drones that Ukrainians published, and that's it. We haven't seen missiles, we haven't seen tanks, we haven't seen armored vehicles, we haven't seen nothing that can stop the Russian attacks. Nothing. And I don't know what the Ukrainians are going to do in this very critical situation when the not just production process of Russia is ongoing, the science development process is unstoppable and is getting momentum. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds me to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.